Hey y'all, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jane Corley with Pic Visions, Media Arts and Photography. If it's your first time here, welcome! Make sure to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you can be notified every time a new video is uploaded every week. In this episode, we're going to talk about the 19 adjustment layers within Adobe Photoshop. Let's get started. So once you have Photoshop open and an image placed, I've got this really great image of a cairn we ran across on a kayaking trip, and it's got a lot of really great colors and a lot of really great detail and some really great aspects for adjustment layers. So as we've learned in my previous workflow, I typically will go and drag my background layer down and create a background copy so I don't make any adjustments to this background negative. Adjustment layers can be found in this panel here and can also be found in this little yin and yang almost symbol down here, and it will give you a list of all of the adjustment layers. If you do not have this adjustment layer panel here, go up to your Window tab on this main File menu and go to Window, Adjustments to get your Adjustments panel. Our first adjustment layer is going to be Solid Color. Solid Color is going to give you a color picker where you can go between these hue scroll bars and pick your color that you would like. We'll pick this little teal color and hit OK. This is going to do a color overlay onto your image. By selecting the eye on and off, you can reveal or conceal the layer, and within this color you can actually create a mask if you would like, and that's where this panel right here is found. We'll go through masking a little bit later on, but just to kind of give you a brief overlay, if you wanted to manipulate the mask of any layer, make sure that you are selected on the black and white color swatches. You can always select this little tab right here to reset your color swatch to black and white. Make sure your brush tool is selected, and make sure that you are selected on your mask layer, this white layer right here. The rules for masking, and I'll go through a little bit deeper in future videos, but you will use the color black to conceal your mask and white to reveal your mask. So if you were wanting to hide your mask or remove your mask from above the layer, you would conceal the mask using black, as seen such. And if you wanted to reveal your mask, creating this color again on top of that image, revealing the mask, you can hit X to select and change to your white swatch, and it will paint back over your mask. You can adjust your opacity and your mode, but we will go through a lot more of that in another episode. But just so you know what this white panel is over here, that is going to identify your color fill mask. So I'm going to drag this down to the trash can and we will move forward. The next is going to be your gradient. If you wanted to add a gradient, say black to white, it's going to adjust a gradient on top of your image, almost like a gradient overlay. You can adjust the gradient to linear or radial or angle, reflected, or a diamond. Let's take a look at radial, and then you can actually change the direction of the angle of your gradient. You can change the scale of your gradient, making it larger or smaller. And you can reverse the gradient and de-align it with the layer, and also change the gradient if you would like a more intense gradient. So the way that this gradient could be used, if you wanted to increase the greens on top of this layer, you could double click on this here, select this swatch at the end of your layer because you want to adjust the blacks. You can come down to the greens, select a green gradient from green to white, Then we are going to hit OK, and we're going to make it a linear gradient, allowing the gradient to be bumped at the green portion. Then using a blending mode, you can adjust how that overlay reacts to your image. Adding more, subtracting more, and then using the mask, you can selectively make adjustments to whatever portion of this image that you wanted to apply that gradient fill. Moving on to pattern overlay. Your pattern overlay is going to give you many options. You're going to have all these really great selections to choose from that come with the default to Photoshop. Or you can load more patterns, delete patterns, you can reset your patterns, save a custom made pattern, and also add a different category of patterns that are also preset within Photoshop. Let's say I'm going to this artistic patterns. It's going to come up with this dialog box as a warning. Replace current patterns with the patterns from the artist's surfaces. If I say OK, it's going to replace all of these panels here with the artist surfaces panel. I can hit cancel if I want to say no, 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 or I can say append, which will add the artist surfaces to the default options at the bottom of this list. So we'll say append, and you see they have been added down here. So we can choose any of these. Really great textures to add to your image. You can choose to link it with the layer or not. And then you can also adjust the scale, how intense it is on your image. Think of it, how zoomed in is it going to be? You have this blank slate, and I want to zoom it in so I have more condensed texture on my image. We'll hit OK. And then using your blending modes, you can actually create a texture on top of that image. I'm going to use my arrow keys up and down once this box is highlighted to really just freehand select through these images of different blending modes. And then if you have a rolly wheel on your mouse, you can also use that to scroll up and down within these blending modes. And say I really liked this one here for some reason, I could then adjust my opacity, adjusting the density of how intense that pattern is overlay on my image. So that is pattern fill. We'll drag it down to the trash can, get rid of it. The next is going to be your brightness and contrast. Instead of coming down to this list down here, where you saw me click on it, brightness and contrast is going to create a layer. Another way to do that is in these adjustments provided here. So as you can see, when I hover over this little sunshine, brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and we can acquire it that way instead of coming down here if that suits your workflow a little bit better. Now the brightness and contrast is going to give you an auto where Photoshop will say, I know what to do, I will make the adjustments for you. Or you can come in here and make those adjustments yourself. You can decrease the contrast, increase the brightness, or decrease the brightness, depending on what the look of your photo you're trying to get. Same as all the other adjustment layers, you can adjust the blending mode, and you can adjust the opacity. Next, we will move on to levels. I love levels, y'all. Levels are my friend. Curves as well, but levels are probably my favorite. As many of the other boxes, you are going to have presets where you can do default, you can do darker, increased contrast, lighter, midtones, brighter, or custom. Next drop-down box is going to be the RGB channel where all of your channels are affected. Or you can just affect the reds, the greens, and the blues levels. Now what are levels? Levels are increasing or decreasing the levels of the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, giving more depth or less depth to the shadows, midtones, and highlights. if you wanted to automatically select what you want white to be or what you want black to be in your image, you can use these eyedroppers here and here to really quantify what you want your image's blackest black to be and what you want your whitest white to be. So say I wanted this little patch here, I wanted that to be my blackest black. That is going to make adjustments within this image to make sure that this is my blackest black and let's say this is my whitest white. Now, if that doesn't work for you and we're a little bit blown out, you can hit Control Z and Control Alt Z to come back to this default option, and we'll do this another way. This slider here is going to adjust your highlights. This slider here is going to adjust your midtones, and this slider here is going to adjust your blacks or your shadows. A little helpful hint, little hotkey hint if you will, if you hold down your Alt key on your keyboard and slide this black slider, you see that it automatically turns the canvas white. That's going to allow you to slide up, and it's going to show you how intense those shadows get as you bring it closer. I would go until you see those colors starting to be present. I would just go a little bit further to really make those darks and the shadows darker, and that's where I would leave it. You click off and the image appears again. You can do the same thing with this white panel, this highlights panel. Hit Alt and click and hold. You see all of those whites are already selected. Whites you need to be a little bit more conscious of. You don't want to blow them out too much, especially in this sky area. So what we're going to do is we're just going to bring them so we get a little bit of detail but not too much, and your whites are selected. We have this really great highlights area down here where the sun was hitting it just right, and we really want to make and showcase that area right there. And we will move on to curves. The curves layer is going to give you, similar to what the levels panel gave you, where you have a black to white slider where your shadows and your highlights, but you're also going to have a Y-axis slider to do your shadows and your highlights. You have the same color picker options as in the levels tab, and some great presets options like all of the other adjustment layers. RGB, you can do full color mode channel, or you can go to individual colors, and then you also have an automatic curves adjustment. When I clicked on this automatic curves adjustment, note that this curve here is an S as in Sierra formation. If you can get your curves when you're making adjustments into an S formation, just know that a curve that's an S is a happy curve. You want to have your curve not straight on, giving a one-dimensional look. You want to add more to that curves adjustment. So you can see you can grab these anchor points and pull them down or push them up to really find where you want your curves to go. And then you can also create additional anchor points by just clicking on the line to make that adjustment. Or you can draw your own line to make that curves adjustment as such. So moving on from curves is going to be your exposure. Your exposure adjustment layer is going to have presets you can use. It does not provide an auto like in other panels, so you're just going to have to figure it out yourself. Sorry guys. But your exposure, this is going to overexpose, underexpose your images if you need to make those adjustments. Your offset is going to manipulate the shadows exposure, and the gamma correction is going to manipulate the midtones exposure. You have the same selections you can make with your eyedroppers to select absolute white, absolute black, and then of course you have your masking adjustments as well. So moving on from exposure, you are going to get into Vibrance. Now we're going to pop some color, y'all. Vibrance is, pretend like it's the little brother or little sister of saturation. It's going to make saturation adjustments with less intensity. As you can see, this is really going to pop your colors out. That brings your saturation, or your vibrance rather, down, but it doesn't go down to no saturation, as if you were to come down here and bump your saturation and it's too much, or bring your saturation down and it's monochromatic. So your saturation is going to be a lot more intense than Vibrance. But this panel is really great if you wanted to just spice up your colors a little bit and make those minor adjustments to the vibrance and the saturation of the colors within your photograph. Next is going to be hue and saturation. Hue, you have presets, of course, and you have a master channel as well as individual color channels you can make adjustments to. We'll switch back to master. You can adjust your hue, and you can adjust your saturation and your lightness within the image. You can make it brighter, you can make it darker, to adjust the saturation darkness and the saturation lightness of the image, to really just make those selections custom to whatever you want your photo to look like. Go to your blending modes and change the overlay blending mode of that saturation level, or just leave it on normal to translate what you have done in this box as a permanent layer of hue and saturation. And then of course change the opacity of that hue and saturation layer. So let's get rid of these and move forward to black and white adjustment layer. Now, black and white adjustment layer, you are going to give presets in these areas. I would encourage you to play around with them, but I'm just going to kind of break it down for y'all real quick, this black and white adjustment layer. Now, you may be saying, Jane, why is there all these colors here? Because we're adjusting a black and white. It should just be black, white, gray, middle gray, however you want to discern it. But understand that when you are making a black and white adjustment layer, you are actually manipulating how light or dark these colors are saturated onto your image. So let's click off this layer and hide this layer here. Hide the black and white layer we just made. Note these reds here, and down in this area we got a little bit of brown that might be affected with the red. So notice how those red areas change if I lighten those reds or I darken those reds. It's going to saturate or desaturate the reds or the tones of the red channel. Same with the yellows. We notice a lot of areas of yellow. We're going to decrease or increase your yellow. It even brings it up to this tree area where the sunshine hits it to really lighten that area or darken that area. Same with the greens, cyans, and blues. And then finally magentas, which it doesn't look like we have too many magentas in this area, maybe a little bit in the rocks down here, but the magentas. So that's what the black and white layer does. Alright, so moving on from black and white, we'll take this down to the trash can and we will go to photo filters. Photo filters are really great to use if you have a photo that is too hot or too cold. I'm sure you've heard that terminology before. We have a warming filter on it already, which is a warmer color, an orange or a red or something of that nature. And then you can select the density or opacity, really, in this situation, the density of that photo filter onto your image. So you can always select filters, and it will give you pre-selected filters that you can use. You know, we have a deep emerald that's a really great for kind of a greeny sort of look, then an underwater. Just some really fun filters to play with that you can manipulate to get the exact look that you want on your image. So that's photo filter. Then of course you can always do your blending modes to change the look, and your opacity to change the density of that photo filter on your photo. So we'll drag this down a trash can and move on. Next is going to be your color mixer. Your color mixer is a very unique panel. It is going to give you defaults to choose from, but if you'll notice, you don't have the RGB color channel. You only have the individual channels themselves. So if you're making adjustments to the red channel mixer, it's just going to make adjustments to the red entities of your photo. So if you wanted to darken those reds, you could darken those reds, darken those greens, darken those blues within their relationship to red. Green, same thing. Darken the greens, darken the blues, and also adjust the contrast within those channels. So that's your channel mixer. It comes in handy, especially if you pair it with a blending mode and opacity adjustment. It really can bump up the different colors in your Photoshop project. Next, we're going to do color lookup. Color lookup pertains to the way that your photo is lit, how the light relationship with colors is manipulated. So LUT files, a LUT stands for Lookup Table. It's used a lot in animation and video, but we're working with photography, so we'll talk about it with photography. The LUT adjustment is going to give you either a standard, or you can come down here to these preset options and change the way that that photo was lit. So this was probably shot at noon on a bright sunny day, and the weather was great. But if you wanted to change it to look like, well, I shot it in the middle of the night by moonlight, that's what the image is going to look like. If I shot this with a tension green filter over it, that's what it would look like. If I shot it and I wanted a film stock look, that's the way it would look. This is going to change the lighting look of your photo by putting a photo filter on the image based on a color lookup panel. So the LUT file options are up here. Then you have some abstract options that you can bring in if you have them loaded on, or you can change to any of these pre-selected options here. If you wanted to link a device selection, you have some options here, or you can load them in from that file browser you saw that just popped up. But for the most part, I typically use it on just a standard LUT file and to adjust the lighting, and then we'll manipulate a little bit with the color mode adjustments that you can make just to give it a little extra something else. And then, of course, the opacity adjustments to change the density of that adjustment layer on your image. A lot of these options, guys, just play around with them. Play around with them and notice the relationship that they have with your original image. Notice the adjustments that they make on your original image, and really just become associated with the different relationships that these adjustment layers can put onto your background photo. The next option on your layers adjustments are going to be the invert options. Now, the invert options, there's a lot of things you can do with an invert option, but typically you're going to find a lot of your options here in the mask selection, where you can change the density of that image or the feathering of that invert. And you're also going to be able to mark the edges, determine the color range, or just straight up invert the invert, which is going to give you even more of a diluted look. Like any other adjustment layers, you can always make overlay and blending modes adjustments and adjust the opacity density of that filter on top of your image as such. So we will move on from invert and go to Posturize. As you'll notice, the Posturize layer only has a levels adjustment. So think of levels like the levels adjustment. Your highlights, shadows, and midtones. This is going to discern the amount of levels allowed within this Posturize adjustment panel. Now, we're at 4 right now, so 4 levels are allowed. If you bring it down even more to 2, it's going to give you something incredibly different than what you even had at 4. But as you'll notice, once you get up to about 25 to the end mark, it really doesn't make any adjustments because all of your levels are already shown. So a way to really get exactly what you want out of this Posturize level is to highlight the number in this box and either use your arrow keys to bring up those adjustments in a small frame, or you can use a roll wheel on a mouse, which I would suggest if you don't have one already, get one because it's a game changer in post-production. As well as any other adjustment layer, you can use blending modes and change your opacity for whatever look you're wanting in your photograph. So we'll drag that down and move on to Threshold. Threshold is going to give you a slider to adjust black and white details allowed in the image. Your contrast can quickly be lost, but it's going to give you this edgy black and white look. Not a monochromatic look where you have some grays, some midtones, all that good stuff. It's going to give you a straight up black or white. Those are your options. You can also adjust the opacity as it appears on your image, or even go and do blending modes to really give you that pop of your shadows behind your main subject formation, or just the shadows within the details of your image. So that's Threshold. Next is going to be Selective Color. Selective Color is going to adjust the color range and make minor adjustments. It's similar to hue and saturation, but you're going to have more control with all of these slider options based on the colors, not the color channels, but the genuine colors that are available in your image. So you do have a default option. You don't have any additional presets, but you can add presets if you find something that you really like within these adjustments. You can add customs, but we'll leave it on default in the reds for now because we've got a lot of reds in this image, a lot of browns, a lot of really different changes that we'll make once we start adjusting the reds within our colors. So you can add to your reds, and you see the only thing that's being adjusted is the reds. The greens, the blues, the grays, the whites, the yellows, all that stuff is not being adjusted. It's only products of the image that involve red. Magenta, if they have red in them, the magentas will be bumped, your yellows within the red, and your blacks or your shadows within the reds to be adjusted. And then of course you can go through all of the other color selections and make the selections you require. As such, let's take a look at the green, because we've got this really great green field of trees in the background, and let's make some adjustments to, you see this yellow that comes through the sky and almost kisses those treetops. We're going to come and bump that up, and you can see how it's becoming so rich within the highlights of those tree lines, and adjust the shadows down, making more of a hideaway within these shadow portions. Magentas, it's not going to make too much of an adjustment, but the cyans, this tree area up here where these cyans are popping through, having a relationship with our green tones, when you adjust up the cyans, that area is going to be darker and it's going to be more contrast because of these cyan adjustments within your green color. You also have a relative and an absolute adjustment you can make if you would like to discern your different categories between relative or absolute. And we will move on to our next and final adjustment layer, which is your gradient map. Your gradient map can be adjusted with the slider bar here, and you can also select from any of these custom gradients if you would like, or you can create your own gradient by clicking on this area here, your little slider bar, and then these swatches down here, you can double click on those and create your own gradient map. Say we wanted it to be like a red and black. You're going to hit OK and hit OK to select it. Now this looks like a negative, but a red and black toned negative, which is super edgy, super cool. That's the look you're wanting to get. But when you get to your gradient map, notice this reverse check tab. If you select the reverse, it's going to give you the reverse of that image. And if you remember, the reverse of a photograph is your negative. So the gradient map will provide a negative version of this gradient map overlay, and then you can reverse it, giving you this tone, this tonal overlay for your image. So along with all the other adjustment layers, you can adjust with a blending mode for this overlay. You can also adjust the opacity or the density that that adjustment layer is going to show onto your image. So I hope this video was helpful. Make sure to leave in the comments below any ways you use adjustment layers to step up your Photoshop workflow. Until then, I'm Jane Corley with Pic Visions, Media Arts and Photography. Make sure to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you can be notified every time a new video is uploaded every week. Until then, see you next time, guys.